In a portrait of the artist as a young man, James Joyce constructs a complex psychological portrait of Stephen Dedalus as he evolves from a timid schoolboy into a self-aware artist. Among the many figures who shape his intellectual and emotional growth, Emma Clery occupies a unique position. She is not a central character in the traditional sense. She has little direct dialogue and minimal physical presence, yet she exerts an enormous influence over Stephen's imagination. For Stephen, Emma becomes an object of desire, devotion, and spiritual projection, embodying both the sacred and the sensual. Emma is thus less a fully realized person than a mirror reflecting Stephen's own conflicts between body and soul, sin and sanctity, desire and art. Role in the narrative. Emma Clery first appears early in the novel as a fleeting image of romantic innocence, a girl Stephen admires from a distance during his days at Clongowes and Belvedere. His attraction to her begins with youthful shyness, a silent crush that fuels his fantasies but remains unexpressed. She represents an ideal of feminine purity that contrasts sharply with the guilt and corruption surrounding him in the adult world. However, as Stephen matures, his relationship with Emma changes. His early idealization gives way to ambivalence and confusion. After his sexual awakening with prostitutes, Emma becomes a symbol of the chastity he has lost, the spiritual purity that he both yearns for and resents. His inability to reconcile his sensual instincts with his religious upbringing transforms Emma from a real girl into a psychological battleground. She becomes, in his mind, alternately a saintly Madonna and a tempting Eve. In the later chapters, particularly in chapter 5, Emma reappears in a more humanized form. Stephen encounters her during the Christmas holidays, and the moment is charged with ambiguity. He imagines that she has flirted with another boy, and he feels both jealousy and shame. Yet his feelings are immediately transmuted into poetic inspiration. He writes verses about her beauty and virtue. This oscillation between emotional confusion and aesthetic transformation defines Emma's narrative function. She catalyzes Stephen's creative awakening, turning personal experience into art. Thus, within the structure of the novel, Emma's appearances mark turning points in Stephen's development, from innocence to sin, from guilt to artistic vision. Though she remains distant, her presence is crucial. She represents the emotional energy that fuels Stephen's journey from repression to expression. Symbolic significance. Symbolically, Emma Clery embodies the idealized feminine principle, a fusion of erotic desire and spiritual aspiration. In Stephen's imagination, she becomes the incarnation of both the Virgin Mary and the muse of poetry. Joyce uses her to dramatize the split between flesh and spirit, a central tension in Catholic psychology and in Stephen's inner life. During his adolescence, Stephen's attraction to Emma is filtered through religious imagery. He envisions her as pure, radiant, and unattainable, a Madonna figure whose very inaccessibility sanctifies his longing. This mode of idealization mirrors the Church's treatment of female purity, the woman as a symbol of spiritual perfection rather than as a living individual. Yet the same impulses that sanctify Emma also eroticize her. Joyce thus uses Emma to expose the psychological consequences of repression. Stephen's inability to perceive women as both spiritual and sensual leads him to oscillate between extremes, the prostitute and the Madonna, the sin of the flesh and the purity of the soul. Emma's symbolic power lies in this duality. She embodies both the ideal that Stephen seeks to transcend and the emotional reality he cannot fully escape. In this sense, Emma is not merely a personal muse, but a symbol of the artist's imagination itself. She is the external form through which Stephen discovers his inner creative vision. When he gazes at her, he is really staring at his own power to aestheticize experience, to transform confusion and longing into artistic expression. Broader implications. On a broader level, Emma Clery's character reflects Joyce's exploration of the artist's relationship to the real world. and more specifically to women. Her transformation from flesh and blood girl to aesthetic ideal illustrates how art both illuminates and distorts reality. Stephen's idealization of Emma mirrors the artist's temptation to use others, especially women, as material for creation rather than as subjects with agency. Joyce thus critiques the very process of artistic idealization that Stephen celebrates. At the same time, Emma's symbolic role carries national and religious overtones. Like Mary Dedalus and other female figures in the novel, she is associated with Ireland itself, the beloved, idealized, and unattainable motherland. Stephen's alienation from Emma parallels his alienation from his homeland and his faith. He loves them, but he must reject them to become free. The same impulse that drives him to exile from Ireland also drives him to transcend Emma's physical reality. She becomes, in effect, the aestheticized image of the nation he leaves behind. Joyce's treatment of Emma also anticipates his later exploration of the feminine in Ulysses, where he revisits the problem of male perception through the voices of women themselves. In A Portrait, Emma is voiceless, a function of Stephen's limited perspective. Her silence underscores the limitations of the artist's self-centered vision and invites readers to question the authority of his viewpoint. In this way, Joyce subtly undermines the romantic myth of the male artist and his muse. Emma's absence of voice becomes a critique of the very aesthetic idealization that fuels Stephen's art. Conclusion: Emma Clery, though marginal in appearance, occupies a central symbolic and emotional space in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. She represents not only the awakening of Stephen's erotic and spiritual consciousness, but also the emergence of his artistic imagination. Through her, Joyce dramatizes the transformation of lived experience into art, the process by which reality becomes symbol, and desire becomes creation. Yet Emma also exposes the tensions within that process. The artist's need for freedom versus his dependence on the material of human emotion. The idealization of women versus their erasure as real individuals. For Stephen, Emma is at once a revelation and an illusion, the embodiment of the beauty he seeks and the evidence of the distance between art and life.